Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, happy for summer. And with me is my equally happy for summer co-host,
Laura Estes Swilly. I am a high school English teacher and a writer, and I'm happy to be here today.
So we're going to talk about a story that is very sweet and is about a teacher who's just so flexible and caring and talented. But the heart of this story is anxiety.
Yeah, when I was looking through our stories, it's hard to pick, right? I mean, when it's your turn to pick, don't you feel like I want to do everything? And so I was looking at them, and this one popped for me just because we're all coming out of testing season all over the country. We're finishing, and we've all watched how hard that is on the kids we've nurtured and cared about for an entire school year, sometimes more. And I felt the crunch of test anxiety with what's been going on in my school building and school buildings all over the country.
When you were a student, a high school student, did you have test anxiety?
No, I don't think I had ever any kind of anxiety. I know that's a weird thing to say. I knew what I knew, right? So if I was going into a test, if we're talking about high school, I probably knew that I didn't know and I wasn't ready, and I was just going to get as many points as I could. Or if I knew that I was ready, I knew that I was ready. And so nothing ever bothered me in that sense. But I think it's about performance, and performance, as we've talked about now for a couple of months, is my strong point. And I never felt out of place or out of touch or like I couldn't get the job done. Even when I wasn't ready, I knew I would be okay. So I think it's a personality type thing, right?
Maybe. I had a lot of anxiety about almost everything, but I don't remember having test anxiety to the extent that it impacted my performance. Now, I had test stress, which was probably a good thing, because
Right.
I think maybe a little stress helps us perform a little better. But
100%.
it definitely did not have the kind of anxiety that sort of cripples your performance on a test. And I was thinking about test anxiety and where that comes from. And I think you're right. Some of it comes from feeling unprepared. So if you want to do well, but you know you're not prepared, I'm sure that reduces some anxiety. Or if you have sort of a history of past poor performance on tests, but you want to do well,
Right.
I'm sure that is anxiety producing. But I did a little reading, and there was also this notion of locus of control.
Yes.
So if you feel like your performance is outside of your control, like, will the test be fair? Or for a lot of kids, will it be timed? So if you need time processing and it's a time test, that's super anxiety producing. And aren't all tests, for the most part, because they have to be done within a class time?
Right. By nature of being a test, there is a time limit. And we have lots of accommodations for students who need them. And so those time limits can be expanded, but not for everyone all the time. So it's in my classroom teaching English, when the bell rings, they're scattering all over the school. So how do I keep a whole class to finish a test or to extend a test? I can't, but I can maybe have one kid come back at lunch. Or we have a process at my school during exams. If you have an ESE student who needs extended time at the end of the exam period, you take them down to guidance and they sit down and they continue the test. But then how do they get home, Julie? Right? They need to get on a bus, then how do they get home? So imagine my anxiety if I need that time to process, to respond, to answer all the questions, do the reading tasks. And I'm worried about catching my bus, or how are my parents going to get here to get me when they're at work? For me, that would be anxiety producing from the point of view of a kid.
Yes. Certainly, anxiety, just knowing that everybody else is leaving and you're still at school taking a test, I'm sure.
Right. Or you have to miss lunch. Producing. You don't get to eat your lunch because you need more time. I feel like there needs to be a better system for kids who need a little more time. And I think there also needs to be a better system for kids who need more time, even though they are not on an IEP, but maybe they have test stress or test anxiety. I've had lots of them in my class who are perfectly capable, do an amazing job every day, and then they hit the test and there's a skid, and they'll tell you, I get so stressed out about a test. Well, what are we doing for them?
Right. And for some of them, some of the tests are so high stakes, like UTJP. So college credit is on the line. For some of them, graduation is on the line. Like that. When it's a high stakes test like that, certainly your anxiety is ratcheted up.
Yeah. So this year, for the first time, I think ever, I was teaching senior regular. So I had the regular, the honors, and the AP throughout my day. And I had a number of kids in my senior regular who had not passed their reading benchmark yet. And it's May and they haven't passed yet. And the stress and the sleeplessness and the anxiety was they were wearing it everywhere they went. There was no question that these kids were struggling emotionally because they were struggling scholastically. And I think that the truth is that maybe it was something we don't talk about a lot. If you're a senior, a second semester senior, and you haven't yet passed your sophomore reading benchmark, which is when we take it in Florida, and there are lots of multiple chances, by the time you get to the second half of your senior year and you haven't met that, there's something's wrong, right? Something, you're missing something along the way, or your life has a barricade that is stopping you from success. I don't know. I think it's an individual thing for each kid, but it's not just they're not trying hard enough or the school isn't doing enough. Something's wrong. And when you know as a kid something's wrong and this isn't working, I can see why that test would be paralyzing to you.
Right. And like this story, it's too bad we don't have enough alternate paths for kids to demonstrate what they know and can do. Because that same kid sitting with you, reading out loud, answering questions might be fine.
Yeah.
And, if they get to high school and they haven't been identified as needing some kind of support or accommodation, it's really tough at that point to figure out what's going on.
Yes, it can be. It can be. And it's stressful for the classroom teacher as well, because we can see it. We can't identify it, not my place to speak to that. And getting that attention to the high school junior, senior sitting in the classroom isn't always easy.
Yeah. And I had always taught, as an administrator, I had pre-K to fifth, but always taught primary. So pre-K to second. And that's when you're really attuned to what they can do versus how they perform in different ways. And you're looking at kind of sensory things. Is there any visual impairment? Can they hear me clearly? Gross motor skills, fine motor skills, like all of those things. But for kids who slip through during that time, because they're maybe highly mobile kids, or they're not at a place where people are adept at identifying that, they can go all the way through without any kind of assistance.
And then those are the kids who end up at the end of their senior year saying things to their English teacher like, oh, well, I can't do that. I'm not smart enough. Or I don't know, I'm stupid. What, miss, what do you want? We hear that, and it's painful because I don't think they are, right? And I do think they can. They just have learned over time that they haven't been able to. And so why would today, this test or this moment be any different than the pattern of moments that have led them here?
Yeah. Because if every time a test lands in front of you, you already know you're either not going to finish or not going to pass, why would you go into it strong?
Right. And really, why would you even give it the bulk of your attention? We've all been in classrooms and watched students give up on tests, just 15 minutes, put their head down, that kind of thing. And I think that behind that, there are lots of reasons that happens to a kid, or a kid makes that choice. But I think some of it is, this isn't going to be any different. So why am I going to show how much that I care or pretend that I care? Because if you act like you don't care, then it's not a big deal that you fail.
I was talking about that with some of my grad students about procrastination, because there's so many reasons why we procrastinate or fail to prepare. And I don't give tests. Mine are all teachers preparing to be principals. So everything is either a paper or a project or some kind of action and reflection. But they'll turn in something last minute. Even my teachers, who are such good grad students, that I know isn't the quality that they can do or typically do. And we talked about all these reasons for procrastination. And sometimes it is when I don't have the efficacy and I feel like the outcome isn't going to be good anyway. If I don't prepare, then I just can blame it on my lack of preparation.
Right. Not that I didn't do enough work, or I didn't fully understand the task, or I didn't put the preparation into not sitting down and doing it, but the actual, what I was supposed to do before I sat down to do it. I can just blame it on never getting to it. Right. I just didn't get to that.
Or that my writing skills aren't what they need to be, or anything else that I might internalize or feel less than about. I can just say, oh, I'm just so busy. There's so much going on. I should have started earlier.
Right.
And I'm sure that's true for your kiddos too.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I actually had a student this year who I would used to call it opting out. He would opt out pretty much of my class. And that was just a nicer way to say he's refusing to do the assignment. He's just opted out. And really, I feel like by the time they're juniors and seniors, they have choices, right? Maybe you're okay with a C. And so you can opt out of doing your best work sometimes. And I can't hold you to a different standard than your family holds you to. And so if a C is okay and you opt out of some things, then that's what you do. And that's your choice, because they're growing into adults who are going to be making choices. But this young man took opting out to a whole new level and literally opted out of my class, the whole thing.
Wow.
And got a 0% as a senior, needing English to graduate, and would pretty much say, well, I was not going to pass this class anyway. Well, I was not going to pass this class anyway.
But he attended class
every day.
He came and spent that hour, or back then was it 90 minutes with you every single day. He was there.
Yep.
but
Opted out.
chose in no way to demonstrate. You know, he was learning. Like, you cannot be in your class every day and not learn, but opted out really of demonstrating his learning.
Any demonstration of learning and any demonstration of focus, even. Was he listening? I'm pretty sure at times he was. Every once in a while, he would pop out with some information that I knew he was with us, or I could see there was a lot of thinking going on in there. And so that was even more frustrating to hear. Well, I was never going to pass this anyway, because he had every ability to pass at the minimum, but do just fine in my class. And it was a choice not to. And what I really had to come to terms with that student was, I can't impact all of this. Some of this has nothing to do with me. Is there an anxiety that if he tries, he might fail? Probably. Is there a whole ton of stuff going on at home? Absolutely. And I can't get to the bottom of that fully when I have 30 other kids who are opting in, maybe not all at one time. But we've got a lot going on in there in a really short amount of time. And I never could get to the bottom of why these choices were being made in my classroom, not from the student and not from the parents, not from the guidance counselor, never got to the bottom of it.
So glad you said that, because in teaching, sometimes we get this message: every kid, no matter what, whatever it takes, failure's not an option. You know, the loud, like usually from guys who stand on chairs on stages and yell those kinds of things. But we get that message, like, you know, if we just taught harder, worked harder, we would not have any failure. Or, you know, that we can form this relationship with every kid that will be transformational. And we forget that it's a dance, right? Mm-hmm. We do our part. They have to do their part. Whether it is forming a relationship with a kid, like we can be the kindest, most responsive teachers ever. And if a kid decides they don't want to have a relationship with us, it doesn't matter. We can teach our hearts out and be flexible and responsive and try to accommodate their learning styles. And if a student refuses to demonstrate learning, what do we do? So I'm so glad you said that. All we can do is all we can do, you know?
It's true. And every teacher has had the epiphany, I can't chase one kid at the detriment to other kids, right? If you've got 30, you have to take all of those kids into consideration when you're making those choices about how to spend that 1 hour or that 90 minutes or that even that day if you're in an elementary classroom. But you're right when you said somebody's been telling us that it's up to us, and if anyone fails, we failed. And I think that's why I walked away feeling some amount of failure for the entire year, not because of the 160, but because of the one who I could not get to even read to us or join us. Hey, we're just writing a poem. Hey, this is something simple you will love to do. No, nothing. The refusal. For someone to get a 0% feels like my failure equal to his.
And I know you as a teacher in this way because you had both of my kids, and because we've been talking about teaching for so long, you were not going head to head with this kid and engaged in this battle.
No.
You were doing all the things that we know work, coming alongside. Hey, not why aren't you working, but hey, how can I help you get started? what do you need to get started? Like all
offering
the tricks.
all the opportunities. For me, that's what teaching has a lot. It is. I'm offering opportunities. Same as I did with Connor Hassan. I offered him an opportunity to write a poem, and he did. It was about golf, but it was good. I offer opportunities, and I encourage, and then I nurture and celebrate, and create.
And you support, like when they are struggling, but they have to meet you
somewhere.
Yeah.
Just meet me somewhere.
Which is what I love about this story that you picked today, because this is a success, right? A kid who was struggling, genuinely wanted to do well, and just wasn't. And a teacher who was determined to engage in this dance with her and figure out how to make it happen. So
when I read this story, I'm really looking at both sides and what both of them brought to the table, because you're so right. And I really appreciate you highlighting this focus. It takes both sides. Obviously, we're the adult in the room and the adult in the situation, but everybody has a part to play.
So with that, will you share Marley's story about her high school history teacher, Mrs. McCall?
I would love to. I had a failing grade in American history, even though it was my favorite class. I looked forward to it every day. My teacher, Mrs. McCall, was passionate about history and made it interesting. She made the people and places come alive. She used stories, discussions, and projects to get everyone involved. She would often assign each of us a role as an historical figure and ask us to role play an event. My grades on classwork were great, so I'm sure Mrs. McCall was confused by my test scores. By the midpoint in the semester, I had failed every test. One day, Mrs. McCall asked me to stop and see her after school. She asked me how I prepared for the tests. I told her how I used the textbook, my notes, and flashcards. I explained that I felt ready for every test until it landed on my desk. Then I freaked out. I got anxious and couldn't remember anything. All I could focus on was the clock ticking. Mrs. McCall talked with me about the items from our last test. As we talked, I remembered the names of people, places, and even the dates. Mrs. McCall decided that I should take my tests orally with her after school. In addition to asking me test questions orally, Mrs. McCall taught me relaxation techniques and memory tricks. My grade increased, and so did my confidence. By the end of the year, I was able to pass written tests. I even got a B on my final exam. Now that I'm a nursing student, I memorize so much information and frequently take tests. I still use the techniques Mrs. McCall taught me. I'm grateful she took the time to understand my anxiety and put such effort into helping me.
Mrs. McCall, what a great teacher.
Right. Such an example, not just of being flexible, but of meeting the student where she was and providing her the information that she needed to feel like she could be successful.
It's one of the things I love about teaching, and one of the things I've been writing about recently quite a bit in my research is this curious stance. So if we look at kids like a bit of a mystery or a puzzle, and our job is to try to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's what Mrs. McCall did. Like, what's really happening with this kid? Because if you've got one who's performing in class and then bombing the test, there's a number of potential reasons.
Exactly.
And she went at all of those to try to figure it out.
Yes. And when a kid has decided that your class is their favorite, you know it. Right. So Mrs. McCall also knew not only does she do great in my class, she's highly engaged in these activities we do. This is her favorite place to be every day. Why is she failing my tests? And it's as easy as asking those questions sometimes.
Yeah. Like, how are you feeling right before the test? How are you feeling during the test? When the test is over, do you feel like you did well? Like, there's so many great questions you can ask to try to assess, and then to look at a bit of history. How is she typically done on any test? Is this
Right.
new? I love that she approached this as, we're going to figure this out and we're going to try some things. And it ended
work
up
on it together.
Yeah, it ended up being multiple things, and some of them long-term solutions for this kid who was going to go on and take a lot of tests.
Right, right. And I think for some of us, we might feel like giving a test orally is a great way to assess what a student's learning in my class, but it's not helping them. It's a Band-Aid because they still have to go into their math class or their science class or their whatever class. They still have next year and whatever's coming in the future. But that's what's so important about Mrs. McCall as a blueprint for us is she didn't just do the oral tests. She started exploring ways to help her student be more successful and feel more confident. And in some ways, it feels like when I read that story, it was really about building confidence.
Yes. Easing anxiety and building confidence and just giving her some tools, that not only helped her with the test, but helped her feel ready. And I love this story because it reminds me of one of your former colleagues who taught AP US history to my Kaylin, who has a lot of anxiety and who struggles with tests like that.
Yes.
And he taught them some yoga stretches and practices and some breathing techniques. And she's done yoga ever since. And it's really
I think you're talking about her AP Human teacher, right?
Is it AP
Ryan
Human?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I am wrong on that one. Yes.
That's okay. As soon as you started talking about the breathing techniques, I knew because he was so big in teaching them some of the yoga and the meditation to help them center themselves and believe in what they were getting ready to do. He taught them the power pose. I don't know if you know the power pose. It's almost like Superman, right? Where you stand with the hands on hips, feet planted wide, shoulders squared. And I used to have kids in my classroom stand in front of their desks and power pose at the desk to get ready to write an essay that was coming, because essays are every bit as stressful as a test, maybe more so for a lot of us. And so he taught a whole generation of students how to start to overcome those fears.
He really did. And there was so much to that in terms of just processing emotions and understanding where they are in your body and kind of working that out and understanding how powerful breathing is in calming you down when you're a little anxious or escalated. I mean, those were really powerful life lessons. So every time I read this particular story, I think of Mr. H, as he is known in our house.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He's good stuff. He's great. And I was thinking about Kaylin with this story as well, because she told me early on, so I taught Kaylin as a 9th grader and as a 12th grader, but early on in her 12th grade year, she was taking the hardest class on campus, and that was AP Lit. And she told me, I just get really stressed out about tests. And so we spent some time on test anxiety and managing those feelings as well, because when you have to face something really hard, you have to be calm or you're not going to be successful.
Yeah. It's interesting, as a parent of 2 kids who are, biological siblings, nothing alike.
Wildly different.
One of them, I swear, Connor Hassan could take a test on anything with very little preparation and nail it, because he's just a really good test taker. But because of that, he's a very confident test taker, and he sort of understands the language of testing. And I think to him, it's a game, And Kaylin, who thinks about things very slowly and takes her time to really try to process things. A time test is just a whole different deal.
Right. And I think Kaylin is such a great example of the kinesthetic type of learner that is dealing with feelings, not necessarily movement all the time, but feelings. Her emotions and her feelings are involved in her learning and in her test taking and in her writing. And when we have students like that, and we do have millions of students who work from a point of feeling, they need more time.
Yeah. Especially with subjects like reading or AP Human that elicit feelings.
Yes.
You know, it's different. I mean, part of it may be Connor's an engineer. Like most of his tests were math and science. You know?
Right. He didn't worry about emotions.
Oh. And she actually, even though she'd always been stronger in reading, she loves to read, she did pretty well on math tests. But part of that, we'll throw out another colleague of yours, was Mike Latimer, who gave her a ton of strategies for attacking a math problem on a test. Right. So there are so many great teachers who are teaching strategies that kids carry beyond the curriculum for assessments that they're going to face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's incumbent upon us to kind of talk to them metacognitively sometimes about that. Yes, I am teaching you this strategy today for this purpose, but you're going to use it. If you hold on to this and master it and employ it, here's how you're going to continue to use it. I do that a lot, but I don't know how many of us do that a lot. I think I'm always thinking about them as post high school because they're so close to leaving. And so if I was teaching 8th grade, I probably wouldn't be thinking that because it seems so far away and they're such little babies in 8th grade. But mine are so close to that precipice. So I talk a lot about how you're going to use this specific, maybe not this book or this poem, but what we're doing with it. You can do 1,000 things this way.
Which makes that content so relevant and important too.
Yes.
Even for the ones who appear to be in all of their presence, or I should say lack of being absent, although not fully present and participating, still that relevance and talking about why it's important long-term makes a difference. So teachers, thank you for helping us learn to pass all the tests of all kinds, because there are so many. And thank you for noticing what kids need and figuring out how to support that. We so appreciate all that you do for all those many different kinds of learners in your class. And so this summer, now that summer is upon us, we hope that you rest and recharge and get ready for all the tests that are coming next year. Have a wonderful week, everybody. I wanted to tell you the Chalk and Chances website has been upgraded, updated with lots of new stories and things for you. So we'll drop it in the show notes. I hope you go over and check it out.
I'm so excited.
Are you excited?
Yes, I am.
And I am.
I'm excited to share it, and I'm excited for everyone to get on there and start participating in our community.
And I usually send everything to you in the secret slide first, and I did not. So I'm excited for you to see it too. All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research and books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.